when we could be having a way to make sure that our family members get the education they need to get a job and move forward in their lives. Hello, I'm John Tierney, your congressman in the 6th District of Massachusetts, and I say that because, as you know, this year we start a new district, the same communities as last year and previously, but in addition of Billerica, Tewksbury, and parts of Andover. So I welcome those new constituents and look forward to serving you. Also want to just tell you that every month or so we do a half-hour cable show, is the one we're doing today. And if anybody has any ideas of what they'd like to see on the show, then certainly hope you'll go to our website at www.house.gov/Tierney and just go right to our Contact Us section and email in an idea of what topic or issue you'd like us to discuss, and we'll try to get that done. But with me today to talk about the Veterans History Project, the two gentlemen who had everything to do with its beginnings and its origin. One is a colleague of mine, Ron Kind, from Wisconsin, the western part of Wisconsin, La Crosse in particular. And Ron and I got to Congress at the same time. We're sworn in, have been great friends since then. He had this wonderful idea that we'll talk about shortly, but he has Massachusetts connections. Besides doing all the wonderful things he does here in Congress, where he's on the committee, the Ways and Means Committee, that deals with health care and trade. He's very active in farm issues on that, doing a great deal in conservation and trying to move that bill in that direction. He also is very concerned, obviously, with veterans on that. But when he had a real period of time, he was in Massachusetts, and that was his college years, right. Where he was at Harvard, played a little football up there, and then went back, of course, to the London School of Economics and on back to Wisconsin and then for Congress. Of course, I always tell Ron if he'd been able to get to Salem State, he wouldn't have to worry with Harvard. It would have been fine. Also joining us today is Bob Patrick, who is the director of the Veterans History Project since its inception on that. But Bob had a long and storied career in the military. Retired as a colonel, I believe, had been at the War College and also had been in Western Kentucky, graduate on that, and then your graduate school was Virginia Military Institute, right?
Exactly.
And did that, but he had a good career in the military, did a lot of project management work and human resources work, and now is with the Veterans Project on that. And I welcome both of you. Thank you for participating in the show. And I think people, particularly those with veterans in their family, but everybody, I believe, is going to be interested in this topic. So let me start by asking the obvious question. Ron, what is the Veterans History Project?
Well, first of all, congratulations on your election, John. As you mentioned, we came into Congress together. You've been a great member to serve with, a good friend. We're looking forward to serving together in the 113th, addressing the tough issues that we're facing as a nation. And somehow, some way, we got to figure out a way to come together and start accomplishing things. But I love my stay in Massachusetts. It's a great state, a great area. Of course, I played football when Doug Flutie was playing at Boston College, so guess who got all the headlines?
A little more attention.
This guy was 5'0". He wins the Heisman Trophy. Go figure.
And had a fairly good career after
and not a bad career after that as well. But the Veterans History Project, and with your help and with your support back in 2000, we got this legislation passed, and I think it was one of the fastest bills to work its way through Congress with bipartisan support. And it's just a very simple concept. It's reaching out to the veterans in our lives, asking them to share their stories of what it was like to serve our nation, trying to preserve an important part of American history. And what gave me the idea to move forward on it was a Father's Day weekend at the picnic table with my dad and his brother, my uncle, sitting there. My dad was Korea generation. My uncle flew bomber missions in the Pacific during the Second World War. And they started talking about their service for the first time to me. And I had two little boys at the time who were too young to understand all this. So I told them, wait a second, as I ran into the house, got the family video camera, set it up, because I wanted to record their stories for the benefit of my two boys. And I got to thinking, with all the technology that we have around us today, we should be doing this as a national project. And so I brought that back to Washington. And again, with your help and support, we got it passed. And now with Colonel Bob's leadership at the Library of Congress and the great staff they have over there, it has just taken on a whole new dimension, and I think we have over 80,000 of these stories that are recorded so far, yet many more still to go.
We all have the same experience, I think, once we're fortunate enough to be in office, when people come in, and usually it's not the veteran. Usually it's a child or a grandchild who comes in and says, my grandfather, my grandmother, whatever, they served in a service-related area as a civilian or were in the service, and we know they're warranted some medals, but they don't have them, and we wonder before they get too old, can you go and get those for us? And you track them down, you get the medals, and you get the story behind the medals.
Yeah.
You find out some incredible stories of very heroic acts that people never spoke of.
Yeah.
They didn't mention it to their kids, they didn't mention it to the grandchildren, whatever, and they're embarrassed almost when you bring it up and do it. But then when they start talking about it, it's fascinating on that. So Bob, so how big has this grown, and how is it working?
Well, the way we work is primarily through oral histories. And as you just said, Congressman, we sit down, we ask people to sit down with a veteran in their life and record an oral history, audio or video. Everybody's got a video camera or a recording device somewhere in their home or knows someone that does that, and have them tell about their human experience of war. We've been capturing stories from World War I all the way up through current conflict, and continue to do that across the nation. We get 100 new collections in every week.
Do you really?
Absolutely.
Where do you put them all?
Library of Congress,
Big
the
building,
greatest
right?
library in the world.
But you know, the stories are range from World War I, World War II, all the way forward, and conflicts on that. But they also are not just combat issues on that. They're feelings. And I'm going to ask for a tape to be shown here right now. Somebody just talking about the feelings and what happened in their service in a more recent conflict of Iraq. So if we could please cue that up, and we'll just show a short segment of that. It'll give people an idea of what can be done.
Diego Garcia was an interesting place. There was like I said, the island's owned by the British, and they had a bar car there called the Brit Bar, and that's where a lot of us decompressed after we flew our missions. We would get back, it would be late at night, and they would keep the bar open for us, and we would go and get plastered, because I guess that's what they did in the past, and that's what we did. And it was our way of kind of forgetting where we were for just a little while. And one time a ship came up with a bunch of Marines that were coming back from Iraq. And we were sitting there talking, and they asked what we did. Well, we're B-52 aviators. And I got the biggest bear hug from this Marine that I've ever gotten in my life. I thought he was going to break me in half. But they were so grateful for what we did, because we flew over the Marines as well and provided air cover for them, and that meant a lot to them. Probably saved a lot of their lives, and they knew it, and it was just amazing. You'd never think a Marine would do it, but he gave me a huge hug and told me thanks. And I told him thanks for what he did as well. So we had a good time that night.
So, you know, it's not specifics about the mission itself, but the camaraderie, the reliance of one branch on the other, one human being to another, and the fear. You can tell, you know, the reason that they have to decompress is obviously it's very unnerving and very dangerous work that they're doing. Yeah. You could also tell from that clip that he was in a classroom. You can see the blackboard behind him. And a lot of this happens around schools where students are in video programs or history programs or both. Yeah. And we did that in Lynn one time. We had a group of youngsters in Lynn, Massachusetts with 3 World War II veterans who told stories, 2 were brothers and another gentleman, about, you know, trying to get out of Russia in the dead of winter back to the lines of the Allies on that, and that struggle back, and a woman that had carried one of them when they broke a leg. A Russian woman had picked up one of the guys and carried him literally through the snow all the way. And so stories like that, the kids were enamored, but they learned something about, you know, war is not this movie that you see with all the glory or anything like that, that there are trials, and it is hard, and it is not an option that you want to go through unless you absolutely have to on that.
John, you're right. And that's one of the neat features, I think, about the project is you can do this in many different ways. You know, I was originally thinking about keeping it as simple as possible in the family setting, across the kitchen table, and just setting up the family video camera and talk to the veteran in your life and have them share their story. I mean, if I had a nickel every time a family member today comes up to me and says, geez, Ron, I wish I had sat down with grandma or grandpa or mom or dad before they passed away so we could have had this in our own family, I'd be one of the richest guys in the country. And that's why time is of the essence. We lose so many veterans every day, especially of the World War II and Korea generation. And initially, at the beginning of the project, it was a major outreach effort for that generation, understanding we were losing so many of them. And now we're kind of shifting the focus to the Vietnam era because they're getting up there in age too. But and it's stories about time of conflict or peace, because all our veterans had a role to play, and getting all of that encompassed and stored at the Library of Congress, one of the great treasures that we have as a nation.
You also make a good point about the intergenerational part of it. We work a lot with high schools and colleges and universities as well, having young people sit down with these veterans and have their minds open. I often say one of the great things you can do is sit an 18-year-old down and talk to a World War II veteran or a Vietnam veteran and say, what were you doing when you were 18 years old?
They get a little philosophical.
Exactly.
That's the interesting part I thought, is they not only talk about the detail of what they went through, but they then talk about the concept of war. They talk about what goes on, what happens to you emotionally when you're in that situation, the challenges, some of the decisions you have to make, and it makes the kids think about their perspective of what people are doing when they're reading about it in the paper and how difficult some of the choices are.
Yeah.
So Bob, how do you go about doing this? If I'm somebody that wants to do a project, what do I do?
Well, we rely on volunteers across the country to do this. And I tell you, it's, as Ron just said, we have had a lot of families sit down with a veteran in their lives, but we use a field kit that we send out to people. We've had, as I just mentioned, schools do this, retirement communities, veteran service organizations, historical societies, across the board. Organizations have sat down, taken this field kit, which tells you how to do the interview. Very simple. We ask for at least a 30-minute or more interview, and record the story. Again, kind of walking the veteran through their life experience before they went off to the military, their experience in the military, and then one of the most important things, what it's meant to them at the other end of that.
What's the longest interview you ever got? That sounds like that interview could, if it was my relatives, that could go on for a while.
I personally have done a 4-hour interview, and it's
too much information?
Yeah,
or is that okay?
no, it was all great stuff. But as a lot of these veterans, I often tell people, you ask them, World War II veteran, where were you on December the 7th, 1941? And 45 minutes later, you ask your next question. Yeah. Because they're just so wired, they know their story, and it's a great thing to do.
It's an important point. There's no right or wrong way in doing it, and the key is just to, first of all, ask the veteran to share that. And some veterans are reluctant, obviously, given the experience in that. Others never thought about talking about it before, but and it's neat because the Library of Congress did a fabulous job laying out how to do it. They can also download this or go to the Library of Congress's website. I
was going to ask you, do you have to go to the Library of Congress to get this material and view it, or can you?
Absolutely not. Our website, www.loc.gov, www.loc.gov/vets, or just do a Google on Veterans History Project. It'll be the first thing that comes up. And you can download the field kit. You can also see a lot of these interviews. We have about 85,000 in the archive right now. We've been able to digitize about 12,000 of those, so you can search the database, pull out names, see a lot of these stories, and again, kind of see how to do an interview.
And if you come to the Library of Congress, they can physically go to an area of the Congress and see this?
Absolutely. The American Folklife Center reading room at the Library of Congress. Anyone can come to the great Library.
American Folklife Center.
American Folklife Center.
Right. And then there's an area where you just go in and view them, or does all the apparatus are there?
Exactly. Exactly.
How much traffic do you get, Bob?
We get about 10 researchers. A lot of it has to do with research too. A lot of this material is being used by researchers. Teachers are using it in the classroom. Scholars, and just people who have an interest in World War II. People are trying to run down their father's unit and get some more information, or maybe connect with somebody. So we get a steady stream of researchers and just citizens coming in to see it.
So when you go there to the site, or like, you can do it by unit, you can do it by name, you can do it by community?
By name, unit, service, conflict, some other search terms as well.
And that's part of the preliminary questions we ask the interviewers to go through, so we can properly index it and archive it, so for research purposes. But documentaries are being made of it now. Books are being written based on these stories too, and again, it can be as complicated as you want to make it, or as simple as you want to make it too. But getting back to the generational issue too, I had an alternative high school back home that got involved in conducting these interviews, and afterwards I gave the kids and the veterans certificates for participating. And these are at-risk kids, at risk of dropping out and who knows what. But I asked one of the boys what he thought about doing the project, and he said, I always thought history was boring and reading stuff out of books, but being involved in this, it made me feel like I was doing my role of preserving American history. And you can just see his eyes light up and the connection that was made. And wow, what a powerful event that was.
I don't have Oprah's book club here, but I'm going to mention I was reading the book Unbroken. I don't know if you've had a chance to read that or whatever. Yeah. What a story! I mean, of an individual, and if that isn't one for the archives, I don't know what is. But there are others who live through experiences like that.
Yeah,
exactly.
And you just don't ever hear of them. I have an uncle who just basically was in the Pacific in the Air Force working on one of the airstrips, and he had never spoken about it until Beverly Camp, BevCam, one of the local communities, had a project like this, and they put the veterans in there, and it was the first time his family had heard him talk about his experience. So it's really a way of opening people
I
up.
refer to them as our silent heroes in our own lives, in our own community. You don't know who it is. You don't know whether it's a family member, whether it's a friend or neighbor. For me, it was my barber for 18 years as a kid growing up on the north side. He cut my hair every 2 weeks or so, and never once did he breathe a word. I knew he served, but I didn't know how or what he did. And then finally, through this project, I asked Jerry if he'd be willing to share a story. He was reluctant. You know, I really didn't do anything. Well, after I interviewed him, he went on the D-Day invasion. He was there during the Battle of the Bulge. He was taken POW and sent to a German concentration camp and came out at about 75 pounds. I'm thinking, oh my God, all these years, and I had no idea what he did for our country and what a hero he is until this.
And that's a point we try to make, that every story is important. It isn't just the grand and glorious, as you mentioned, you see in movies and television and all that. It's everything. It's, as I say, from the cockpit to the foxhole to the mess hall to the motor pool. They're all important stories. And
well, the interesting thing that the kids were getting out of some of the work that we've done on it is that you think you have a mundane job in the military, and you talk about it for a while and say, okay, take that function out. And how does the rest of it run?
Exactly.
You know, and the kids get thinking about that. So you can't, you know, just because somebody's on the front line, that's very exciting and it gets a lot of attention or whatever. But the person is feeding them, can't live without them. The person is filling up the and gassing up the equipment and maintaining the equipment and taking all of that works all the way down the line. It's a whole system that goes, and it lets people know that, like everything else in life, you're a systems management guy, Bob, so you know how important all of that is.
And we should also mention, it's not just the stories, but we're also collecting letters and diaries, written documentation that may have been kept throughout the years, and that is a
Originals
part
on that?
Original materials, photographs, letters, diaries. Too often people, you know, if a veteran passes away and they have all these letters and photographs, they don't know what to do with them. And we encourage them to send them as a part of this project, because that's another way of telling the story. Even if the veteran has left us, it's another way of telling their story through the Library of Congress. And the library can preserve this material like no one else can and make it available. So it's a great way to, in fact, it's a great supplement to a lot of these oral histories as well. The letters are very, very compelling in many cases.
Well, you have such a competent staff over there. I mean, it is the most fantastic library around. And there's, I don't think there's any debate about that. When people come down to Washington, amongst all the things that they want to see, I invariably always say to them, you have to go over and see the Library of Congress. Most spectacular place, I think, in Washington, particularly the main library room, which they don't make them like that anymore.
It is. We call it the most beautiful building in Washington.
Yeah.
I think that holds
it's
up.
right on the hill. People can see it just as they're seeing the Capitol and the office buildings and go by. But they treat every document and every project with the same excellence on that, and your staff puts it together. So you know, like, I'm sure this is just something spectacular.
Well, we've got two great treasures as a nation. One is the Library of Congress. The other is our public lands that we're responsible for.
I thought you were going to say the other was Bob.
And the other guy, Bob's a part of all that. That's right. But, and now at the library too, they're commemorating the 150th anniversary of the Civil War. So they have a wonderful exhibit on about the American Civil War and what took place.
Which building is that in?
That's in the Jefferson Building. And I think a lot of citizens need to know, I mean, it's their library. It's the nation's library. They can come there at any time, use the great resources, or again, go online to our website and get a lot of this material right streamed into their homes.
So what's going on with the Civil War exhibit?
This is, well, the library is commemorating the 150th anniversary of the commemoration of the Civil War. And they're taking a lot of what we're doing with the Veterans History Project, a very personal approach to it. A lot of the documents you'll see are the letters, a lot of the original documents themselves. I think, in fact, I know next month, January, the Gettysburg, the Emancipation Proclamation is going to be on display. Gettysburg Address is later going to be on display.
So that'll be the beginning of this month in January, or the end of this month?
The end of this month in January. And then there's some great map collections over there, photographs. Again, it goes on and on with what the library has, but it's going to be there for the next year. So we encourage everyone to come in and take a look at that.
Let me ask you about the Veterans History Project again. There's a project that Ken Burns did. Is that any relation to this, or how is that working?
Well, as a matter of fact, and Ron knows this very well, when he did his World War II documentary on the war, World War II, he came to us because he was looking to do an oral history project around that, and said, oh, the Veterans History Project. So we promoted that across the country. Maybe you want to speak to that?
Yeah, and we asked Ken if he'd do some public service announcements about the Veterans History Project, and he stepped up and he did some PSA announcements, try to get the word out that this project actually exists, and hoping more veterans will step forward and share their story.
He's a great speaker. I don't know if people know that. Salem State University has speaker series, had him up a while back, several years ago, or anything like that. I thought he was fantastically interesting. He was on, he get up there, he gave his presentation, everybody was enthralled with it, and he's
probably the best storyteller we have today in the country.
What might be known is, and he's working on Vietnam right now. In fact, he came to us about a year ago, and I think it's coming out in the next couple of years, a documentary much like the World War II.
And is he getting materials out of the Veterans History Project?
We're directing him to some interviews that may be a part of that.
And is there any connection between the National World War II Memorial Registry?
Absolutely, there isn't. I mean, that's another way of people honoring their veterans by, and again, they can go online through that and for free put their name in the kiosk that's there with the National World War II Memorial.
There were a lot of people that were involved in the wars, any war or any conflict, that aren't actually veterans, but are associated with the conflict one way or the other. Everything from Rosie Riveter to other support roles on that. Are they included at all in the Veterans History Project?
We have people who have supported the war effort, like you just mentioned, Rosie the Riveter, USO entertainers, Red Cross volunteers, a direct relationship with supporting the military. We have a number of those stories as well. And as you had mentioned earlier, all this is important to telling the story of war.
Now, people should, is any of this verified? I mean, it seems to be like an almost impossible task to do that, so people should know that these are stories and documents that are proffered and put forward, but they're not necessarily researched, and they could no way to do that, right?
They are not. You couldn't, but it's what oral history is.
Right.
It's someone telling their story about their particular views or what they went through during a time in their life or during a time in history, and what they say is what they understand happened.
You know, what's asked a lot is, what if you know somebody who's a veteran who had an unbelievable story that they did share with you, but now they've passed on? Is there a way of capturing that? Is there a way of that to fit into your program?
Again, we ask for first-person stories, and it's really difficult for us sometimes when that happens, when a wife or a son or a daughter knows this story so well, but it's just based upon the legislation, they had to be first-person accounts. But again, as I mentioned, if they've got some of these other documents, letters, maybe the veteran's written a memoir, photographs, those kind of things can also tell their story.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been one of the neatest projects I've certainly been involved in, and it's the last ask of a grateful nation to our veterans. And what better way to honor our veterans than to give them their sense of immortality, have them share their story. It goes to the greatest library in the world, the Library of Congress. Is digitized now and available for future generations. And that too is an important part of the project, is maintaining this American history for future generations, so we never forget, the sacrifice and the service of our veterans during times of conflict and during times of peace.
Well, how do you see it promoted in most congressional districts? And maybe we'll start with Ron. How do you promote it in your district?
Well, we're doing our own PSA announcements back home, letters to the editor. We do outreach to schools, to VFW halls, American Legion halls, and Veterans and Memorial Day events. I'm always raising it. I'm doing letters to the op-ed pages and that. So, and we're always looking.
Veterans getting very involved with it.
Yeah, we've got some of the commanders of our American Legion posts and that, trying to get word out to their membership too. And that's been one of the challenges, quite frankly, is using every tool available in order to let people at least be aware that this project exists.
Another opportunity we have is we can give workshops in districts.
Oh, really?
As a part of the program, we have trained oral historians or folklorists literally around the country, that if people get together with about 25 people who want to be interviewers, we can send out one of these.
Let's do one of those up on the 6th. Because we've been mentioning the program, we're talking to schools about it, sending out notices to veterans or whatever, but if you're willing and it would do that, then maybe we'll do that up. Have you done that in your district?
We've had people come in too. It's really simple.
And that's the biggest challenge we have. It isn't veterans. There's 17 million living wartime veterans that, that are out there. It's getting people familiar with the project, very easy process, and sit down and do these interviews.
We have some really interesting stories on that. One area of my district up in the Cape Ann district that Ron will remember from being there. You're not a Massachusetts guy, a Harvard guy, or that.
I was stationed up in Portland, Maine for a while. Spent
Close
a lot
enough.
of time down in Massachusetts.
But we have a high concentration of veterans, in large part because of the maritime situation of World War II. So many of the people that were on boats and working in that industry or anything like that were sort of grafted into the service and served in the maritime aspect of that. So we had such a high concentration of veterans. It actually helped us in the sense of getting one of the community-based outreach clinics. Back 15, 16 years ago, when that concept started coming around, we were trying to convince the Veterans Administration that our district should have some. And we used to have these little gatherings, like health shows, whatever, to show them the interest. And the one we had in the Gloucester Cape Ann area got more than anybody. And I was surprised. I think some of the people at the Veterans Administration were surprised, but when you break down and see why, you know, that it was really because so many of the people had just been brought right into the service on that basis.
Sure.
And that you probably found out the same thing. But there have got to be a million good stories right there.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, there are. And you know, I found through the interview process and the outreach process, sometimes it's hard to get the veterans to share their story because A, they don't think they did anything that special or extraordinary, and they did in their own right, in their own way. And then when you do get them to tell their story, there's always a constant theme to it. You know, they enjoyed serving the country, but more importantly, they felt a great responsibility to their colleagues who they were serving next to. No one wanted to be the weak link. And that was a strong motivating factor for them in their service, and especially during times of conflict.
And nobody's advocating going to war except as a last resort.
Yeah.
And every single one that
Absolutely.
I've seen, and this is interesting for the kids to hear.
Yeah.
You know, because so many times we glorify the violence and glorify the concept of war or whatever, and to a person, every one of the veterans has basically said, you don't want to go there. You don't have to go there. And they start talking about the difficult part of serving, you know, right in the middle of a conflict or something like that. It's
How
an
real it
eye-opener
is.
for a lot of the
That's
kids.
an important point. You know, the project is not meant to glorify war. It's just to allow them to share their
Oh, right.
personal experience and what it was like, and so we have a greater understanding of what
Right.
our veterans went through.
It provides, one thing we always talk, it provides a grassroots level look at war and what it was like to be there, what it felt like, what it smelled like. And too often we get the view from historians and generals and all those kinds of perspectives, but really to get that feeling.
Well, like the tape that we saw, just a short segment of it, I was surprised at the number of people that wanted to talk about more than just the actual facts of what happened. They want to talk about what it meant to them, how they felt going through it, the conflicts emotionally that they felt, what effect it had on their life afterwards. You know, there was one particular tape that I watched. You probably were good enough to send over a couple from which we chose that clip. But one was a gentleman really struggling over what it had done for his life. He felt he had post-traumatic stress, you know, afterwards, just from what he had seen and experienced and witnessed and participated in, and how he carried it through his life. And two things: he kept the trauma of it with him all the time, but also informed his involvement in public service and helping other veterans and helping people that were disabled. And so he spent over 20 years doing that, and says right out on the film that this is what led to doing that. So you can really get some insight into that. Let's wrap it up with your favorite story that you've heard, the one that impacted you most.
Well, obviously my dad and uncle, they were in the family, you know, and I've talked to my brothers too. My older brother was a 4-year Marine. My younger brother served in Iraq, first war there. So, you know, it's the personal stories within your own family.
Have
and
you got your
those who
brothers
you
on
know.
film?
Yeah, and it's, you know, that's what we try to do, make it easy and make it intimate and personal to people too.
Yeah. And is there one that struck you more than the other?
85,000. One that strikes me, and we haven't talked about, is women veterans. And we need more and more women to come forward and tell their stories. And some of the most compelling I've heard are nurses and their service in World War II and Vietnam. There's a particular one, I think you may have seen it, of a nurse who came across the beach at Anzio on the first wave and talked about the experience of treating those troops there on the beaches of Anzio.
Well, we'll see what we can do about concentrating on that aspect. I want to thank both of you for participating in this. I think it's going to be helpful to people in my district and as well as others, and maybe we can get some more good materials to send down to the library, but I think it's a very excellent project. Ron, I want to thank you for having the creativity of doing this and the legislative skill to get it done. Bob, I want to thank you for your great work on the directing the program, and I look forward to working with you and getting somebody up to our district to take a shot at it.
Absolutely look forward to it.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.